Okay, you're staring at the character creation screen, trying to decide what to do. What class is good? What race is good? Does race even matter? These are all questions we all have when we want to create our character, hoping to avoid that one landmine of a class that has just been, for whatever reason, neglected by the developers. The last thing we want to do is find out we have created a pile of unsalvageable garbage when we've already sunk 100 hours into the game. First, don't worry. ESO doesn't have any class or races that can't do all of the content in the game. Sure, some are a tiny bit stronger than others, but the gap is never very large. Beyond that, the meta is always shifting. Every 3 months or so, a patch will come out with adjustments that shake up the meta ever so slightly. Sometimes your class will be slightly ahead, sometimes it'll be slightly behind. Either way, there won't be any content you can't participate in. The first thing you should consider is, what do you want to do in ESO? Do you want your main focus to be solo content and questing, or do you want to focus mainly on group content like dungeons and trials? If you want to focus on solo content, there really isn't anything that you can't choose. It would still be helpful to decide if you're going to focus on stamina, aka melee weapons, or if you're going to focus on magicka, aka staves and spells, because this can influence which race you pick. For solo content, I like Breton, if I'm a solo magicka character. Breton is a great magicka class as its passives help to prevent us from running out of magicka in battle. If you're going to focus on melee weapons, then my go-to class is Auric for damage and move speed, or Redguard if I want to have an easier time managing my stamina pool. Ultimately, you can pick whichever race you want to. None of the solo content requires you to min-max your character so much that your race will break it. Okay, so you figured out your race. Now, which class? And don't worry, I'll touch on group comps next. The solo content is not so overtuned that you will wish you had chosen something else. I did create a solo tier list in which I ran every class in the game through the toughest solo content that it has to offer to determine what I think the strongest solo builds in ESO are right now. I'll link that in the description below in case you want to check it out. But really, solo content is a great place to fly by the seat of your pants and do what you want. If you don't feel strong enough, then go ahead and check out one of my builds. I can't recommend enough to choose a class based on their aesthetic. Which one has the coolest looking skills to you? Which one are you going to be excited about making stronger? Because all of them are capable, and as I mentioned, the meta is always changing. So if you pick a class just because it's the one doing the most damage right now, you may be disappointed in a few months when it's now second or third place. Either way, you've got options. So let's take a look at the options. The Templar will be jabbing things with a Spear of Light. The Sorcerer will be throwing lightning at their enemies. The Nightblade will use shadows and life-stealing abilities. The Necromancer will raise the dead to assist them. The Warden will summon animal companions and master ice. And the Dragon Knight will use fire and earth to take down its opponents. There is very much a theme for each class, and all of them are capable. Feel free to watch any of the class build guides to see what they are, and see which one appeals to you. And there's nothing else that you really need to worry about when choosing your class for solo content. All of them can do everything. It's just a matter of picking the one that's going to excite you. Alright, now let's talk about the group players, and let's get their characters put together, because people focusing on group content may want to min-max just a little more than the solo players will. First, let's choose your role. The first thing you're going to do as a group player creating a character is choose your role. What role do you want to fill? Because this will in part determine what race and possibly even influence the class that you play. Because while any class can play any role, I would be lying if I said they were all equal to the task. So first, choose from one of these 4 roles. Do you want to be a tank, a healer, a magicka damage dealer, or a stamina damage dealer? Tanks are primarily responsible for 2 things in ESO, keeping the dangerous mobs taunted and stacking the enemies neatly. Notice how I didn't say keep all of the mobs taunted. That's not really a thing in ESO. In ESO, tanks will taunt the mobs that can one-shot their DPS while chaining in the rest so that they can die to the cleave damage. Healers are primarily responsible for keeping the group alive and keeping the group buffed. Both the tank and the healers will be responsible for debuffing bosses. Finally, we have both types of damage dealers, magicka and stamina damage dealers. The magicka damage dealers will use staves and they will fire off spells at enemies. The stamina damage dealers will wield swords, bows, daggers, sometimes dual wielding them, sometimes using two-handers, depending on your build. Stamina damage dealers are very much a melee class, for the most part, with the exception of some bow builds, but in group content, even the bow builds tend to stay within melee range. Okay, so now you've chosen one of those 4 roles. Let's talk about how that's going to impact your race and your class. The way to think of races in ESO is not in terms of which race is good for which class, but instead which race is good for which role. Some races are good for tanking, some are good for healing, while others are good for doing magic damage, and others still for being a stamina damage dealer. I did an incredibly deep dive into the meta races for each role in my complete beginner's guide. The link's in the description below, so be sure to check that out if you want to know why these races are the best for each role. But here's the abridged version. Tanks will often go Nord, Argonian, or Imperial. Healers will often go Breton, Argonian, or High Elf. Magic and damage dealers will go High Elf, Dark Elf, and Breton. Stamina damage dealers will go Orc, Dark Elf, and Redguard. Now, please understand that you are not confined to any of these races. Any race and class combo can do all of the content in Elder Scrolls Online, and the swing in performance from the worst race for your role to the best race for your role clocks in around 7%. So it's a difference that's large enough to measure, but it's not going to make or break your character. And if you want to RP your furry little heart out as a Khajiit, or sprint through the forest as a Wood Elf, then by all means, do so. You might not be meta, but you're going to be more than fine. Finally, let's choose our class. I touched on what theme each class represents when talking about the solo builds. Now I'll touch on which classes are currently best suited to which role. And one last time, I'm gonna remind you that this doesn't mean these are the only classes that can perform these roles. They just happen to be the meta, or in other words, they happen to have an easier time at these roles than the other classes at the moment. And remember, that can change every few months. First, let's talk about tanks. Your meta tank classes right now are the Dragon Knight, the Warden, and the Necromancer, probably in that order. These classes are good at tanking because they have a great source of damage mitigation, self-healing, and sustain. In ESO, the tank is just as responsible for keeping themselves alive as the healer is. It's very much a shared burden, so use those heals and damage mitigation abilities and be sure to manage your sustain as a tank. As for healers, the meta choices right now are the Warden, the Templar, and the Necromancer. You can play any class as a healer, but these classes bring some great utility to the groups by way of their buffs, their resource distribution, and synergies. Finally, damage dealers. I feel like this role is more open-ended than ever before. Every class is right up there at the top, but if we had to narrow it down to the top 3, this is what I would go with. Let's start off with the Magicka. The meta magic damage dealers right now are the Necromancer, the Nightblade, and the Sorcerer. For stamina, the top dogs right now are the Stamina Warden, Necromancer, and Templar. But one last time, all classes can do any content in the game. It's just a little bit easier on some than others, and the meta always changes. Some of those classes that I just mentioned weren't on the list a few months ago, and some might not be on that list again in a few months from now. So don't overthink it too much. Pick the class that you're excited about. Next, okay, you've made your character. By the way, let me just say, your character looks awesome. And you've been dropped into the enormous world of Elder Scrolls Online with little to no direction. What do you need to do to make sure your character's built for success moving forward? There are a few things you can do early on to make sure things go smoothly later. The first thing you can do is place one skill from each of your class skill lines on your bar. So grab a skill from each skill line and put it on your bar. This is important to do at low level because by doing this, you're going to ensure that all 3 of your class skill lines are going to level as you level. If you hover over them, you can see that by equipping spells from this skill line, you level the skill line. Therefore, if no skills are equipped from that skill line won't level. And this is how you level your class skill lines. It's important to get all 3 of your class skill lines maxed out so that you can have access to all of the skills at any time down the road, and just as important, so that you can unlock all of the passives therein. Just because the Living Death skill line is mostly healing abilities, there's some of them in here that are actually going to be very useful for me in solo and group content, even though I'm not a healer. Same with the Bone Tyrant being largely tank abilities, these passives are still going to be useful no matter what class I am. So it's important to max out all 3 skill lines and take all of the passives that you will find useful. Elder Scrolls is a game of passives. No one passive is going to turn your character into a god, but when you combine all of them together in all of the different skill lines, that's when your character becomes truly powerful. Next, let's talk about the attributes that you start with. Every time you level, you're going to get attribute points to invest. If you are a Magicka damage dealer or a healer, you're going to pump all of your points into Magicka. If you are a stamina damage dealer, you are going to pump almost all of your points into stamina. You may wish to put a few points into health like I've done here, to make sure that you get up to around 18,000 health on your toon. Essentially, the goal for healers and damage dealers is to be at around 18,000 HP when they've got their food on. Once you have a lot of champion points, you can cheat down below that a little bit because of the damage mitigation you get from those passives, but that's way down the road, so don't worry about that right now. By having around 18,000 health, you should survive most non-one-shot mechanics. Now, what if you're a tank? Well, then you're going to go ahead and put some into Magicka, some into health, and some into stamina. Every tank distributes them differently. Some tanks go heavy into health with just a little bit into Magicka and a little bit into stamina. And some tanks go all health with just a little bit into stamina. It really is up to you as a tank, so feel free to choose what feels right for you. Just make sure that you have more stamina than you have Magicka. The reason you want to have more stamina than Magicka is so that when you take a synergy, it gives you stamina, because most synergies will restore some of the resource pool that is larger. So if your stamina resource pool is larger, you'll get stamina back when you grab a synergy. As tanks, you always want more stamina, because as long as you have stamina, you can block those heavies, you can dodge roll their attacks, and you can survive. Now, at some point, you're most likely going to get that sinking feeling like, oh my god, this sure is a lot of information, and that's totally normal. So I'm going to go ahead and briefly touch on respecking to ease the fears. Let's drop the stress factor down by 100. Here it is. Know this. There is nothing you can do that can't be undone. You do not have to worry about choosing the wrong skills or passives or attributes. No matter how poorly you pick, I mean, even if you choose all of the absolute worst skills, passives, and attributes, it's totally fine. These are all things that can be easily changed for a nominal fee at any time. All you have to do is visit a respec shrine, and moments later, it's like you never made those mistakes at all. Elder Scrolls Online is a very fluid game. It's not only okay with you changing your build from time to time, it encourages it. Now, you may or may not choose to follow a build, and early on, it doesn't really matter. Pick whatever skills look exciting or sound cool and try them out. Equipping them on your bar will allow them to level and eventually morph. Even if you don't end up using them later on, they will retain their levels. So even if you respec out of those skills at some point, they'll always be there leveled up waiting for you to spec into again. One last major point about respecking. At level 43, you get a free respec scroll for both your skills and your attributes. I would hold on to this scroll until you choose a build to follow, if that's something you're going to do. If you aren't going to follow a build, use it anytime you want. One thing to note about respecking is that it costs more the more skill points you have. Therefore, the longer you wait to use that scroll, the more money it's going to save you, because you'll have more skill points, which means it will eventually cost you more to respec. However, even way down the road, when you have hundreds of skill points, it's a pretty trivial cost, so don't overthink it. Now, besides your class skills and your passives, you're going to be able to use skills from your weapons. Weapons have their own skill lines and passives that you can invest in. You're also going to be able to invest in armor passives and abilities, and you're also going to be able to unlock guilds, level those up, grab those abilities and those passives. Just by using this weapon, this skill line will level up, and its leveling speed will expedite more for each weapon ability I place on the bar on top of using the weapon. As you can see, Elder Scrolls Online is a game of skills and passives, and it has a ton of both. In the long run, passives are what will make your character strong. Any one passive won't significantly increase your power, but over time, acquiring 5, 10, 20, or even 30 passives and beyond, it all starts to add up to turn your character into a demigod. As far as which passives you prioritize go, because you will be strapped for skill points early on as you're trying to unlock all of the passives in your weapon lines, in your skill lines, your racial passives, right? It's very common to be strapped for skill points. When this happens, you've got a couple of options. The easiest way to get skill points is to kill the group boss in a base dungeon zone, for instance, in Deshawn. And you go to this symbol here on the map, the little archway of bricks. And inside there's a group boss. It's usually in the room that looks kind of like that's where the boss fight would be. It usually appears just a little bit different from the rest of the dungeon. So run up to the group boss, kill it, and you get a skill point right away. Alternatively, what you can do is just run around the map collecting the sky shards located throughout. Every 3 sky shards is going to give you a skill point. Those are the 2 fastest ways to get skill points in the game, but they're not the only ways to get skill points in the game. If you enjoy questing, the main story quest gives a ton of skill points, so pick that up and run through that. Also, any zone story will give you skill points, about 3 per zone. Now, if you're hurting for skill points, questing is one of the slower ways to get them. So just go around and grab a few sky shards if you really need a skill point fast. Which passives should you prioritize first? I would definitely take your racial passives, your weapon passives, and your class passives first. These are all going to be instrumental to your character's growth early on, so just try to have enough skill points to grab these passives as you unlock them. If you fall behind, don't worry about it. Just keep running around the game, collecting those sky shards, and you'll have enough in no time. So you've got your first few skills on your bar, you're running around the game, you know what you want to do, you know that you want to throw some skills on your bar, you know that you want to unlock these passives because those are actually where all of your power is going to come from in the long run. Now what? Well, now you can do pretty much anything you want. You can quest or you can jump into dungeons at level 10. The world is your oyster, but I would really recommend that you join all of the guilds that you're going to be in. And I'm talking about your NPC guilds. These are the guilds I just mentioned a moment ago. Your Dark Brotherhood, Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, Psijic Order, Thieves Guild, Undaunted. These are all of the NPC guilds in the game. Magic Attunes are going to be using the Mages Guild and the Undaunted Guild. Sometimes they'll dip into the Psijic Order. Stamina Tunes are going to use the Fighters Guild and the Undaunted Guild. And tanks are often going to use the Undaunted Guild, the Fighters Guild, and the Mages Guild. Really, no matter what role you are going to fill, you should always pick up the Mages, the Fighters, and the Undaunted. All three of them will be useful in some way at some point in your character's journey, and it's nice to have them unlocked so that you can level them passively as you play the game. If you hover over the guild level at the top, it'll tell you how to level it. Destroying Dark Anchors and Daedra will level up your Fighters Guild, collecting the lore books will level up the Mages Guild, and running your way through dungeons and getting the achievements therein will level up your Undaunted Guild. Now, if you're a stamina character, you're also going to make sure to dip into the assault line sooner than later because you want this skill right here, Vigor. This is the staple self-healing ability for stamina tunes in Elder Scrolls Online. You get it at Alliance rank level 1. So how do you get to level 1? You've got two options. If you don't want to fight anyone, there's a PvE route to unlocking this ability that takes about 30 seconds. What you're going to do is you're going to press L on your keyboard or click on the Alliance War menu at the top. Pick a campaign, it doesn't matter which one as long as you can enter it. Go inside of Cyrodiil and do the zone story. You do the zone story by pressing M, clicking the zone guide, and then click continue the zone story. Do this while you're in Cyrodiil. It's going to tell you right where to go. You do the first quest, it's going to give you 2 levels, and by doing that, it's going to unlock Vigor for you. Now, there's another option that's completely foolproof, and that is to simply press P on your keyboard or click on the group menu up here, click on the Battlegrounds, and join the queue. And by doing that, you're going to be queued up for the Battlegrounds. As soon as you get into that battleground, you find it out, and once that battleground is complete, win or lose, you will level up enough in your alliance to unlock Vigor. So you've got 2 options. Go to Cyrodiil, do a quick quest, which is really just talking to 2 people in Cyrodiil, or jump into a battleground and duke it out with some people. Win or lose, you'll unlock the ability. As far as getting around the world goes, one of the main reasons to join a bunch of player guilds is so that you can teleport to people in different zones. As you can see, I'm in 5 different guilds, and at any time I may want to go somewhere for free without paying a fine, or maybe it's a shrine I don't have on that character yet. I can look for people in various zones and go, there's the zone I want to go to right there, and I just right click, travel to player. It's going to take me to the shrine that they're nearest. So be sure to try to join some guilds that are doing the same stuff that you want to do, whether that's solo content or group content or simply RPing. There's tons of guilds, and there's guilds for every type of player. So join some, if for no other reason, to have people to teleport to throughout the entire game. Beyond that, at level 10, you'll be getting a free mount given to you. As soon as you hit level 10, it's going to be there. It's going to be equipped. All you have to do is press your mount button. On PC, the mount button is H, and that's going to pull your mount out and throw you on it. If for some reason after level 10 you don't have the mount automatically bound to H yet, go into your collections menu at the top here, go to mounts, and choose the mount by double clicking it. Now, whenever you press the mount button, it will come on out. Next, let's talk about champion points. Champion points are probably the single most intimidating component in Elder Scrolls Online, but that's mostly because of the convoluted way that they're presented to promote that fantasy feeling. You know, they're putting them in this constellation so that it looks cool, it looks fantasy-like. You've got these, stars, and you can invest points into them, and not only that, you have 810 points to invest. How could you possibly decide where to put 810 points, right? Well, don't think of it like that, okay? Instead of thinking of it as, do I want to increase Mighty or Thaumaturge? How am I supposed to know? Well, think of it as, do I want to do more physical poison or disease damage? Or do I want to do more damage with my damage over time abilities, my dots? And just put points into those things respectively if that's what you want to do. Maybe you want to increase your critical damage, so you put points into precise strikes. Read the tooltips and invest in the ones that look most applicable for your character. What you might also want to do is take a look at the passives that you unlock by investing points into a specific tree. So the ritual is the tree I'm looking at. If I click over, I'm looking at the Atronach. Now, if I hover over these things here, it says Opportunist, unlocked at Ritual rank 10. So as soon as I've invested 10 points anywhere in this tree, right, any of these 4 bottom abilities, I will unlock Opportunist. When you interrupt an enemy, your next physical damage ability used within 7 seconds deals 15% additional damage. Excellent, it's a nice little passive, that's a good little buff. Or Perfect Strike at level 30, so once 30 points are somewhere in this tree. It doesn't matter, it could be 15 into Thaumaturge, 15 into Precise Strikes, or it could be 30 into Thaumaturge, doesn't matter. That will unlock Perfect Strike, giving me this passive. So when you're investing in the skill tree, here's what you want to do. Of course, invest in things that are relevant to your build. For stamina builds, you're going to focus on the ritual tree. For Magicka builds, you're going to focus on the Apprentice, right? This is where you've got Spell Erosion, your Elfborn, which is going to increase critical damage by magic abilities, right? So you're going to be in here. Stamina tunes are going to be in here, and either one might dip into the middle one, Atronach. So take note of the passives you want to unlock, find the ones that look interesting to you, and remember this. The most important thing to remember about the CP tree is that every point you put into a specific passive gives you less than the point before it. There's diminishing returns. So the 57th point of Thaumaturge is going to give me less than the 56th point. Therefore, the first few points you put into each one are the most effective by far. And then after that, you get diminishing returns. So what you want to do is try to spread them out because those early points are the most powerful and the later points are doing almost nothing at all. The other thing to remember is that many of these passives round down to the nearest percent. So as you can see here, this one says increases my physical, poison, and disease damage by 13.01%. If I put one more point into this, it would take it to 13.12. But when all the math happens behind the scenes, it's going to use the 13.00% because it's going to round down to the nearest percent. So what you want to try to avoid doing is having points wasted that aren't hitting that next percent threshold. So always try to invest your points into a passive until you hit a percent threshold and then move on to the next one and do the same. The green CP tree is going to be where all of your sustain comes from. This is what helps prevent you from running out of resources as fast. This is why high CP characters are going to have such an easier time of managing their resources than new players. New players don't have all of these resource cost reductions. Reduces the cost of roll dodge by 17%. Reduce the cost of block by 16%. Those are not small numbers. That is substantial reduction in cost of my abilities. Tenacity is going to increase the resources I get back when I heavy attack. Mooncalf is going to increase my stamina recovery, and if I was a Magicka tune, I would go for Arcanist instead of Mooncalf to get that Magicka recovery. Likewise, we have more passives here. Bashing Focus reduces the cost of bash. Warlord reducing the cost of break free. Sprinter reducing the cost of sprint. Again, grab the ones that you think are going to be useful to you. The one CP tree that is pretty much the same for everybody is the red CP. So we're all going to take pretty much the same damage mitigation passives, and the passives we choose in the very end game are going to actually depend on which trial we're in, which raid we're doing, right? Some raids or trials, the bosses put out a ton of elemental damage. So then we'll want to spec this passive tree to do more resisting of elemental damage. Some do more physical damage, so then we spec to resist more physical damage. This is one of the ways in which the game kind of encourages you to have a fluid build and to respec for the content that you're doing. Your red CP is very much a part of that process, but you don't have to worry about that until you're doing veteran trials and veteran DLC trials and things like that. Until then, you can go with your generic CP setup. And if you're looking for champion point guides for your class, I have champion point setups for every single type of build on eso.justlootit.com. Whether you're a Stamina Nightblade or a Magicka Templar, it doesn't matter. I've got champion point setups for every class. So if you don't want to deal with the headache of trying to figure out what you need to invest in yourself, just go hit up my website. I'll put the link in the description below. Look for your build. Whether you're following the build guide or not, the champion point setup will still be incredibly relevant to your character. As far as your gear goes as a new player, or when you start a new character goes, you've got a variety of options. You can try to have someone craft you sets of training gear to expedite your leveling if you know someone that's more advanced in the game and they have the money and the resources to do that for you. But this is totally unnecessary. You will level plenty fast without that. You'll be plenty powerful early on just picking up what you find and wearing that. If you can, you should try to piece together some 5-piece sets. You'll notice that when you hover over items, they have 2, 3, 4, and 5-piece set bonuses. The 5th bonus being the most powerful. So it definitely pays to have a 5-piece set going, or 2 5-piece sets going, if you can find 2 full 5-piece sets. But this isn't something that you need to stress too much on before level 160, before champion level 160. Up until then, you can wear whatever you find, or you can put on any piece of training gear you find, or you can run a dungeon a couple times just to piece together at least 1 5-piece set. The thing about the early levels is you level so fast that you're constantly out leveling your gear. By the time you've got 5 full pieces of gear for a set, that first piece you found, 5 or 10 or 15 levels ago is now, it's very under leveled, and you're almost better off replacing it. So don't worry about it too much. But if you really want to piece together some 5-piece sets early on, it is going to help your power. And you could do that by running a dungeon that has a decent stamina set or a decent magicka set that you could just kind of get 5 pieces of and put on your character, so that at least you have 1 5-piece bonus while you're spelunking around and leveling your character. If you're really ambitious and you're taking it slow and you've got the time, you can totally go ahead and find 2 different 5-piece sets, either through Overland content, like Mother's Sorrow is a great set for magicka tunes, and I would highly recommend maybe in your early levels spending some time in Deshawn on a magicka tune. This is going to give you access to Mother's Sorrow. It drops in the chests, the world bosses, the delve bosses. It drops all over the place. And it's a best in slot set for magicka tunes. You will be able to wear it from level 1 to level 810. It is that good. So on magicka tunes, definitely spend some time in the zone of Deshawn, over here on the eastern half of the map. If you're a stamina tune looking for a decent stamina DPS set, you could go ahead and you could go to either Rothgar if you have access to it, and collect yourself the set called Briar, BRIAR, or you could go ahead and just run the dungeon that everybody has a couple times and just let your group know you're looking for Leviathan. The dungeon is called Crypt of Hearts 1. Just run it a few times and you'll definitely be able to get together 5 pieces of gear. Leviathan is a nice set. It's great for stamina DPS, and Crypt of Hearts is a fairly easy dungeon to run. Beyond those first couple sets of gear, your options are endless. You can go for any set that looks interesting to you if you want to research it. If you just want to pick the best sets, you can check out my build guides on eso.justloot.com. Your options are literally endless. If you're planning to play the game solo, literally anything you want to do is fine. Any of the content that's in the zones, it's called Overland content. This is, if you hear people say Overland content or Overland boss or anything like with the word Overland, we're talking about anything inside of a zone. In other words, anything that's not in a trial, which is this game's version of raids, or anything that's not in a dungeon. So when you're just doing Overland content, that's the questing and anything inside of these zones, or these delves or the public dungeons. That kind of Overland content is all very easy, and pretty much any build you will put together will be able to work its way through it. Some faster than others, certainly, but everything should be able to eventually get through it. However, for group content, you may want to try to follow a build until you know how to piece together your own, especially once you start getting into harder content, the DLC dungeons, and especially veteran dungeons. It's very easy to make a horrible character in Elder Scrolls Online, and since you have 3 other people in that dungeon relying on you to carry your weight, be sure to check out a build guide if you feel like you might not be carrying your weight. And then down the road, you can modify that. Once you understand it, you can modify it to your liking. Some content creators will put together builds that are specifically for Overland content. They'll just be super off meta. They'll be fun, but they definitely aren't meant for doing anything difficult. They're not meant for veteran content. They're meant for just kind of questing and stuff. And so just kind of be aware if you happen to be following one of those type of content creators' builds, and you feel like, gosh, the combat in this game doesn't feel good. I just feel so weak. This is not rewarding. Try changing up your build. Try somebody else's build. Don't just sit there and stagnate on a build that you're not satisfied with. I see a lot of players do that. And the same goes for your class. Like sometimes we just don't click with a class early on in our career. We pick a build that Without champion points, it just really struggles. It's hard to run it. You just don't do enough damage and it feels bad. So try a different class or a different build and you may find, oh man, this class, this is perfect. This is great. This feels good right now. And then you can swing back around to that other class later when you get more champion points. Because remember, champion points are account wide. Every level after 50 is given to every character on your account. So when you get to level 160 or level 810, when you create a level 1 character, you create your first alt or your second or your third alt, and you open up the champion menu at level 1, you will have every one of those champion points to spend at level 1. You can come in here and spend all 160 champion points or 810, whatever level you are, which makes leveling that next character quite a bit more fun because from the bat, your character has better sustain, it takes less damage, and it does more damage. And it's gonna feel better right from the start. And you'll really notice that. So don't be afraid to make alts in this game. Elder Scrolls Online is definitely a game that encourages you to make alts. It rewards you for making alts because there's dailies that you can do on every single character. So the more characters you have, the more times you can do those dailies, and the more you can get out of them. One such daily is your random normal dungeon. You can see here, anytime you're level 50 or above, you get 100,000 XP for every daily you do, and that's going to level up your champion level. And then you can jump on your alt, and you can do your random daily dungeon on that alt, and it will get 100,000 XP. And you can jump on the next alt, and you can do another 100,000 XP. And this is just one of the dailies in the game that you can do on multiple characters. There's tons of dailies that you can do on all of your characters if you'd like to. Oh, and I've got one last tip. At level 15, you're going to unlock your back bar. That's going to allow you to equip another weapon, your back bar weapon, as it's known. One of the things you can do to help level that back bar before you get it is to take a skill from that weapon line and place it on your bar. Now, every time I kill something on my front bar, I have a bow ability here, so it's going to help level that back bar weapon up. This is very useful because we spend most of our time on our front bars, especially in trash fights and things like that, and overland content. You just don't often need to go to your back bar, and certainly you don't go back there to kill things most of the time. So most of the XP you get ends up being received on your front bar, so your back bar weapon can fall way behind. An easy way to counter this: throw a weapon ability from the back bar onto the front bar. Now, it's a bow ability, so you won't be able to use it. Regardless, just because it's there, it's going to be leveling the bow up every time you kill something. So this is a nice little hack to level up that back bar weapon even when you're not on the back bar. As for your armor passives, make sure that you grab make sure you grab your armor passives. Your armor passives are not just for damage mitigation. In this game, your armor passives are a massive part of your character's sustain and damage output. Like if we hover over this here, the first armor passive is going to increase our weapon critical rating for each piece of armor equipped. Okay, that's tons of extra critical damage because we're wearing this armor and we got the passives. Same here, we've got increased recovery and reduced cost of abilities because of this, so there's our sustain, right? So these passives are incredibly powerful. Do not forget to get your armor passives. They're very important to your character's damage and survivability and sustain. Your stamina damage dealers are going to wear 7 pieces of medium armor, so you're going to grab all of the medium armor passives. Your healers and your magicka damage dealers are going to take all of the light armor passives, a few of the medium armor passives, and a few of the heavy armor passives, the first 3 here. The reason being, they wear what is called 5-1-1. They're going to wear 5 pieces of light armor. Then they're going to wear 1 piece of medium armor. So we're going to take the medium armor passives that are relevant to 1 piece, right? This one you'll see, you only get agility when you're wearing 5 pieces or more. So you don't want to get this if you're a magicka character because you'll never have 5 pieces of medium. But you can get credit for the 1 piece you're wearing for the other passives. And same with heavy armor. You're going to take the first 3 because those 3 are each based on how many pieces you're wearing, whereas the last 2 require you to have 5 pieces of heavy, so you don't get those on your magicka damage dealer or your magicka healer because you'll never have 5 pieces of heavy on that character. Finally, then you have tanks, and they're also going to be 5-1-1, which is 5 heavy, 1 medium, and 1 light. Now, if you're wondering why tanks go 5-1-1, mages and healers go 5-1-1, and stamina characters go 7-0, 7 medium, the reason is the Undaunted passive, Undaunted Metal, which is going to increase our maximum health, stamina, and magicka by 2% for each type of armor worn. So if you're wearing 3 types, heavy, medium, and light, that's 6%. If you're wearing 1 type, that's 2%, right? And stamina tunes typically want all of those stamina passives. They forego the extra health and magicka because they want the passives, because that's going to allow them to do the most damage. Magicka tunes do want the maximum magicka and the maximum health and the maximum stamina, and same with tanks. Okay, last I'm going to touch on crafting. Once you're not starving for skill points anymore, you find yourself having maybe a couple or a few more skill points than you need, it's a good time to start dipping into the crafting passives. Crafting passives in Elder Scrolls Online are incredibly useful. You might want to put points into metal extraction. I consider this to be one of the most important ones to level up early on, because one of the things you're going to be doing with all the gear you find is deconstructing it at the benches. Deconstructing gear levels up your crafting bench. You want to deconstruct everything that you're not going to wear. And when you're done wearing it, you deconstruct it. Deconstructing it gives you materials so that you can craft items, or more importantly, so that you can upgrade items from, for instance, purple to gold. Metal extraction, what this extraction does is it maximizes the chances of extracting blacksmithing ingredients and allows the refining of the most powerful tempers from raw materials. So by leveling this up, you get better ingredients every time you deconstruct. You're going to be doing a ton of deconstructing. It's worthwhile to have. The next one that I would definitely level up before you start upgrading gear. So as soon as you get to that point in the game where you're going to be upgrading gear, right? So if you are a magicka damage dealer or a healer, you're going to be upgrading a lot of light armor. So you want to come to clothing, and you want to get this bottom passive, which says more than doubles the chance to improve items with tannins. This is going to reduce the number of expensive materials that it costs you to upgrade gear. For instance, it normally takes 20 of the material to upgrade it, but if you upgrade this to level 3, it instead only takes 8 to upgrade it. So it's costing you less than half the original price to upgrade your gear from purple to gold, because you got this passive. Just 3 points in here, right? 9 sky shards. It's 1000% worth leveling this up, especially for the pieces of gear that you're going to be upgrading. So do not neglect your expertise at the bottom. That increases your chance to improve items, and your deconstructing one, which in this case is called unraveling, maximizes the chances of extracting clothing ingredients. And blacksmithing, clothing, jewelry crafting, they all have these. And it's important to get those 2 passives in each of them, especially in jewelry, because jewelry is incredibly expensive to upgrade. It's also, which means it's very important that you extract as many of the materials for free as possible with jewelry extraction. And then you reduce the number of platings required by upgrading plating expertise. So again, the fastest way to level your benches is deconstructing that gear. This is perfect because deconstructing that gear also gives you materials to craft and upgrade with. There's a nice little circle of life that goes on there, so don't feel bad deconstructing gear. If you find something and you're wondering, is this gear good? Is this gear something I should hold on to? No, it's not. Deconstruct it. By doing so, you're going to get the materials for it. You're also going to add it to your set collection system. So even if you happen to find a useful low-level item, by deconstructing it, you will be adding it to your system later, so that if you ever want to use that item, you can craft it at a moment's notice without having to go find it again. This is one reason why it's really useful to go to Deshawn at a low level on a magicka tune and find Mother Sorrow gear. By doing so, you will fill out some of your Mother Sorrow collection, right? And for each piece you find, you'll later on be able to craft it at max level. When you hit 160, which is gear cap level, you'll be able to craft yourself a full set of Mother Sorrow gear if you found the pieces. And for every piece you found, you reduce the cost. I'm at 51 cost here per. If I find all of these, it'll drop it down to a cost of 25 per, which is great, right? Which brings up the topic of transmutes. This symbol right here is transmutes. These cost 51 transmutes. Transmutes are a resource that you can collect in the game early on. I highly recommend that you start collecting them early by doing your daily dungeons on as many tunes as you are willing to do them on. Every daily dungeon you do, remember how I talked about these being a fantastic source of XP earlier? And remember how I said the more characters you have, the more beneficial this system is? Well, here we go again. the circle of life. By doing these, you also get 10 transmute shards. Let me open up my currency menu here. We go to currency, and you can see that I currently have 634 out of 1,000. Now, if you don't have ESO Plus, your cap will be 500. But I can hold 1,000. You can hold at least 500, perhaps 1,000 if you have ESO Plus. Start farming these early, because once you start using them, you go through them very fast, and they're very important to have so that you can craft yourself that Mother Sorrow set in the right trait when you need it. Which brings me to one last point, traits. Gear has traits, and the last thing you need to know while trying to build this character for success, especially if it's your first character, is, so for damage dealers, for instance, you use the trait Divines a lot. That's the second trait there. The first stat is your enchant. The second stat is your trait. This one is Divines. Damage dealers go Divines on absolutely every piece they can, and then they'll go Bloodthirsty or Infused on their jewelry. They'll go Precise on their weapons, right? These are very common traits for every single damage dealer in the game. So what you want to do is, if you are a stamina toon, what you want to do is you want to find that type of armor. You want to click the research tab, go over to Divines and click it and research it. You want to click research. And if you want to know more about researching and crafting in general, be sure to check out my complete Elder Scrolls beginner guide. That link, again, it's going to be in the description so that you guys can refer to a much more elaborate description of some of these items. They're all there in full detail. If I brushed over it here or you didn't understand a term, be sure to go look for it there, where I made a 2.5 hour video with links to each section. You can just browse for the part that's useful to you, or you can watch the whole thing. It's up to you. But if there's something you need to know, it's probably in that video somewhere. All right, guys, and that's it. That's everything you need to know for starting off your character right in Elder Scrolls Online. I tried to keep this as short as possible. I try not to go into too much detail on some of these topics, but I can't help myself sometimes. So I apologize if I got a little long in the tooth on some of the items. I just want to make sure you know everything you need to know to enjoy the game. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and let me know. If you ever want to hang out with someone else that loves Elder Scrolls Online, be sure to swing by my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/LuckyGhostTV. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.